4-year-old street urchin tied to a pole by store owner, but a millionaire saw it all and does something that shocks everyone. Watch until the end. You won't regret it. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The child's cry sliced through the humid afternoon air like a jagged knife, echoing through the cobblestone streets of Harmony Creek. Beatrice Sterling, 52, gripped the rope tightly, having just bound it around the trembling little body of Willow, a 4-year-old girl who'd tried to snatch a few scraps of fabric from the trash outside her shop. "You'll stay there until you learn not to touch what isn't yours," Beatrice snarled, her hazel eyes glinting with anger as she tightened the knot on the iron lamppost. The child sobbed desperately, tears carving clean streaks down her dirt-streaked, hungry face. Willow tugged at the rope with her tiny, frail hands, but the pressure only hurt her delicate wrists more. She didn't understand why the woman was being so cruel. She only wanted a small piece of cloth to cover the hole in her torn clothes. The ache in her chest came not only from the tight rope, but from a profound sadness a child her age shouldn't know. Across the street, Franklin Hawthorne, 58, slammed on the brakes of his black Escalade as he witnessed the scene. His fingers clenched the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. The man who had built a real estate empire, amassing millions through calculated investments, felt something snap inside his chest at the sight of the helpless child. For a moment, Franklin sat frozen in his air-conditioned car, watching the girl struggle against her restraints. Memories of his own impoverished childhood surged to the surface like violent waves. He himself had known hunger, despair, the humiliation of depending on the charity of others. But something about this specific child struck a deeper chord in his soul, hardened by years of ruthless business dealings. Franklin got out of the car with determined strides, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the simple surroundings of the commercial street. Beatrice looked up as his shadow fell over her fabric store, immediately recognizing the wealthiest man in the county. "How much?" Franklin asked, his deep voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. "Excuse me, Mr. Hawthorne," Beatrice stammered, surprised by the unexpected presence. "How much do you want to let that child go?" he repeated, pulling his wallet from his inside coat pocket. Beatrice hesitated, sensing an opportunity to profit from the situation. "She stole fabric from my store. I can't let it go. Maybe $500 would cover the loss." Without hesitation, Franklin counted out $1,000 in $100 bills and held them out to the shopkeeper. "Let her go. Now." Beatrice's trembling fingers snatched the money before untying the rope. Willow collapsed to the ground, rubbing her sore wrists, but didn't run. Her large, frightened eyes darted between Franklin and Beatrice, like a wounded animal, unsure whether to trust the rescuer or fear another predator. Franklin crouched down slowly, keeping his distance from the girl. "Are you hurt?" he asked in the gentlest voice he could muster. Willow shook her head, but the red marks on her arms said otherwise. Her clothes were little more than tattered rags, and her brown hair was tangled and dirty. She had the look of someone who had seen too much suffering for her age. "Are you hungry?" Franklin tried again. This time Willow nodded timidly, touching her empty stomach. Franklin gestured for her to wait and went into the bakery next door, returning with a bag full of pastries and a bottle of milk. He placed everything on the ground and stepped back, allowing her to approach at her own pace. Willow stared at the food with longing, but her small hands trembled as she picked up the first pastry. She ate with the desperate hunger of someone who didn't know when her next meal would come. But her eyes never stopped watching Franklin, ready to flee at the slightest sign of danger. Beatrice watched everything from the doorway of her store, a mixture of curiosity and regret filling her thoughts. She had never seen the millionaire show interest in anyone, let alone a street child. What kind of man was he really beneath that facade of a successful businessman? When Willow finished eating, she stood up slowly and looked at Franklin with an expression that mixed gratitude and fear. Without a word, the girl ran towards the town square, disappearing among the stalls and leaving Franklin with a strange emptiness in his chest. That night, Franklin couldn't sleep in his luxurious mansion on the outskirts of town. The image of the child tied up like an animal wouldn't leave his mind. For the first time in decades, his millions seemed insignificant in the face of the suffering he had witnessed. In the following days, Franklin found himself driving through the streets of downtown at random times, always looking for a small girl with brown hair. He told himself it was just curiosity, that he wanted to make sure she was okay, but deep down, he knew there was something deeper driving him. It was during one of these searches that he found her again, 3 days after the incident. Willow was sitting next to the town square, playing with pieces of cardboard as if they were dolls. Franklin parked the car at a safe distance and watched, realizing for the first time where the girl actually lived. Between 2 market stalls, there was a makeshift structure made of plastic tarp, cardboard, and pieces of wood. It was smaller than a regular bathroom, but Willow went in and out of it as if it were her home. Franklin's heart clenched as he realized that the child was living completely alone, without any adult to protect her. When Willow saw him watching, she didn't run this time. Instead, she waved shyly, remembering the man who had brought food. Franklin waved back, but didn't approach. Something told him he needed to earn her trust little by little, respecting her instinctive fear of adults. From that day on, a silent routine was established between them. Franklin passed by the town square every afternoon, always leaving something: food, a small jacket, shoes he had bought, estimating her size. Willow took the gifts after he left, but the distance between them gradually decreased with each meeting. What Franklin didn't know was that Beatrice had started following him, driven by an obsessive curiosity about his motives. The shopkeeper couldn't understand why the wealthiest man in the county would be interested in a street child, and her suspicions grew with each passing day. In the 3rd week of this routine, Beatrice decided to delve deeper into Franklin Hawthorne's past, unaware that her discoveries would set in motion a series of events that would change all their lives forever. Beatrice's investigations began discreetly, but her obsession grew with each discovery. During the mornings when her store remained closed, she visited the county clerk's office, the municipal library, and even spoke with retired City Hall employees. What she found about Franklin Hawthorne left her deeply disturbed. Sitting in her back room at the store, surrounded by old papers and dusty certificates, Beatrice put together a puzzle of the millionaire's past. The documents revealed a lie carefully constructed over decades. Franklin wasn't the son of a poor family, as he had always claimed publicly. In fact, he was born into one of the most traditional families in the county, the Hawthornes, owners of vast cattle ranches in the last century. "My God," Beatrice murmured, holding a yellowed birth certificate. He was disinherited at 18. The record showed that Franklin had been expelled from the family after a scandal that the papers didn't fully detail, but which had resulted in his complete exclusion from the family inheritance. Since then, he had built his fortune from scratch, buying land for negligible amounts from families desperate for the economic crisis that had plagued the region 2 decades ago. While Beatrice delved deeper and deeper into her investigation, on the other side of town, a new character was observing the strange routine between Franklin and Willow. Carol Olive, 45, had arrived just 2 weeks ago to work as a social worker at the municipal health clinic. Her previous experience in New York City had sharpened her instinct for suspicious situations involving vulnerable children. Carol first noticed the interaction between the well-dressed man and the dirty girl during her lunch break. She was walking to the town square to buy fruit when she saw Franklin leave a bag near Willow's makeshift shelter. The behavior intrigued her. Why did a clearly wealthy man maintain this calculated distance from a child living on the streets? This isn't right, Carol thought, adjusting her glasses as she watched from afar. Her professional experience had taught her that adults with good intentions didn't act so stealthily. Honest people sought out the competent authorities, did not establish secret relationships with abandoned children. In the 4th week after the initial incident, Carol decided to begin her own surveillance. Every afternoon, she strategically positioned herself at different points around the town square, documenting the encounters between Franklin and Willow. The pattern was always the same. He arrived in the black Escalade, left something near the girl's shelter, watched from afar as she picked up the items, and then left. What disturbed Carol most was Willow's reaction. The child clearly craved the meetings, but maintained a defensive posture that she recognized in victims of trauma. Willow never approached while Franklin was present, but her small eyes followed him with a mixture of hope and terror that broke the social worker's heart. Meanwhile, Franklin struggled with contradictory feelings he hadn't experienced in decades. Each silent encounter with Willow awakened painful memories of his own childhood before he was expelled from the family. He remembered the hunger he felt when his parents punished him by locking him in his room without food. The loneliness of growing up in a cold mansion where affection was treated as a sign of weakness. The truth that Franklin hid even from himself was that his fortune had been built on the suffering of people like Willow. During the economic crisis of the 2000s, he had systematically bought properties from families desperate for amounts far below market value. Many of these families ended up in misery, some even producing children who lived on the streets, like the girl who now occupied his thoughts. In the 5th week, an event would drastically change the course of all relationships. Willow woke up one morning with a high fever and difficulty breathing. Her makeshift construction offered little protection from the cold Harmony Creek morning, and chronic malnutrition had weakened her immune system beyond the limit. When Franklin arrived for his daily visit, he found Willow lying on the dirt floor, shivering violently even under the strong afternoon sun. Her lips were bluish, and she could barely keep her eyes open. For the first time in a month, Franklin broke his distance protocol. "My God, child," he whispered, kneeling beside her. Willow was hot as embers, and her breath sounded like a weak, irregular whistle. Without hesitation, Franklin picked her up in his arms, feeling how her small body weighed less than a child should weigh. Willow didn't resist. She was too weak to be afraid. Her head lolled against Franklin's shoulder as he ran to the car, and he could feel the girl's tears wetting his expensive shirt. It was the first time she had allowed physical contact, but only because she didn't have the strength to avoid it. The Escalade tore through the streets of Harmony Creek towards St. Vincent's Hospital, the only private hospital in town. Franklin drove with one hand on the wheel and the other holding Willow, who muttered incomprehensible words in her delirious fever. Among the confused words, he could distinguish "mommy" repeated over and over, a sound that pierced his heart like a needle. At the hospital, Dr. Iris Fields, 42, the institution's chief pediatrician, received Franklin with efficient professionalism. She had treated many street children brought in by Samaritans, but something about the desperate expression on the rich man's face intrigued her. "How long has she been like this?" asked Dr. Fields, quickly examining Willow as nurses prepared an emergency room. "I don't know exactly," admitted Franklin, realizing how strange his answer sounded. "I found her like this today." The doctor's experienced eyes caught the hesitation in his voice, but she focused on what was most urgent. "Severe pneumonia," she diagnosed after the initial tests. "We'll need to admit her immediately." During the following hours, while Willow fought the infection in a sterilized room, Franklin remained in the hospital hallway like a ghost. He had given his name and taken financial responsibility for the treatment, but he couldn't answer basic questions about the child's identity or medical history. That's when Carol arrived at the hospital. Someone had commented at the health clinic about the rich man who had brought a street child to St. Vincent's, and she immediately knew who they were talking about. Her suspicion about Franklin's intentions intensified when she saw him acting as guardian of a child about whom he clearly had no basic information. "Excuse me," Carol said, approaching Franklin in the hallway. "I'm Carol Olive, a social worker. I need to ask some questions about the child." Franklin turned around, immediately recognizing the official tone in her voice. "She was sick. I brought her to be treated." "And what is your relationship with her?" Carol asked, taking a notepad from her bag. The simple question hit Franklin like a punch. What was his relationship with Willow really? He couldn't explain even to himself the compulsion he felt to protect her, nor the guilt that gnawed at him when he thought about his past. "They want to help," was all he could answer. Carol noted the evasive answer, her suspicions being confirmed. Men with good intentions didn't hesitate so much when explaining their motives. Her experience told her there was something far more complex going on. Meanwhile, at her fabric store, Beatrice uncovered the document that would change everything. Among the old certificates she had obtained from the county clerk's office, she found a reference to an orphanage where Franklin had been briefly interned at 16 before being expelled from his family. The name of the institution made her blood run cold. St. Teresa's Home. Beatrice knew that orphanage well. 40 years ago, her younger sister, Lauren, only 3 years old, had disappeared during a family outing to a neighboring town. They never found the body, but rumors whispered that lost children sometimes ended up in clandestine institutions like St. Teresa's, which had closed under suspicious circumstances decades ago. That night, at the hospital, Dr. Fields performed more detailed tests on Willow, now stabilized but still in serious condition. It was during these tests that she discovered something that would completely change the course of the story. In the girl's chest, X-rays, in addition to pneumonia, there were clear signs of a congenital heart condition that required urgent surgery. But there was something else in the blood test results. Specific genetic markers that the doctor recognized from a case she had studied years before. Willow wasn't just any abandoned child. She had a rare condition that could help trace her family origin, if anyone knew how to look. Dr. Fields' discovery about Willow's heart condition brought a new urgency to the situation. The girl would need complex heart surgery that would cost over $200,000. An amount that few hospitals in the region would be willing to finance for a child without documents or a known family. Franklin didn't hesitate when the doctor explained the situation. "Do the surgery. I'll pay for everything," he said, signing the financial responsibility papers without even reading the amounts. His determination surprised even Dr. Fields, who had seen many charity cases, but never someone make such a large commitment without questioning. "Mr. Hawthorne," the doctor said, pulling him aside for a private conversation, "I need to be frank with you. The tests revealed something else about Willow. She has specific genetic markers that can help us find her family." "I've already requested more detailed tests." Franklin felt his stomach churn. The possibility of Willow having living family brought a fear he didn't expect to feel. In the past 2 months, he had begun to imagine himself as a protective figure in the girl's life. But what if she had relatives looking for her? Carol watched Franklin's every move from across the hallway, her distrust increasing with his refusal to provide basic information about how he had met Willow. She decided to act more directly. "Mr. Hawthorne, right?" she said, approaching him again. "I need you to come with me for a formal conversation. I have some questions about your relationship with this child." "What kind of questions?" Franklin replied, feeling the weight of suspicion in her voice. "The kind that protects vulnerable children from adults with dubious intentions," Carol said bluntly. "You appear out of nowhere, take on exorbitant medical costs for a child you claim to have found on the street, but you can't provide basic information about her. That raises serious questions." Franklin realized that his situation really seemed suspicious from this angle. How to explain that he felt responsible for Willow without revealing the deep guilt he carried about how he had built his fortune? How to admit that he saw in her a reflection of his own traumatic childhood? While the tension grew at the hospital, Beatrice made a discovery that would change everything. She had managed to contact one of the last surviving nuns who had worked at St. Teresa's home before it closed. Sister Constance, now 83 years old, lived in a nursing home in the neighboring town and had agreed to talk about the old records. "I do remember the boy, Franklin," said the nun, shaking her head slowly. "A troubled boy, that one. His parents brought him after a serious problem in the family. He stayed with us only 6 months before turning 18. "What kind of problem?" Beatrice asked, her heart racing. The boy had become involved with a girl in town, got her pregnant when they were both very young. His family didn't accept it, and neither did hers. The young woman, well, she couldn't handle the pressure. Beatrice felt her blood run cold. "What happened to her?" "Suicide," Sister Constance whispered. "She left behind a newborn baby, a girl. The Hawthorns refused to recognize the child as their granddaughter, and Franklin was kicked out of the house when he insisted on claiming paternity." Beatrice's hands trembled as she processed the information. Franklin had a daughter somewhere, a daughter he had lost when he was practically a child himself. Could this explain his obsessive interest in Willow? Was it possible that he saw in the street girl a second chance to be the father he hadn't been able to be 40 years ago? Back at the hospital, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Carol had alerted her superiors and requested a formal investigation into Franklin. Her experience told her that rich men didn't devote so much time and money to street children without hidden motives. "Mr. Hawthorne," she said, now accompanied by another social worker and a court officer, "we need you to come with us to provide formal clarification about your relationship with the minor, Willow." Franklin looked at the group of people in official attire and felt the same despair he had experienced at 18, when he lost everything and everyone he loved. "You don't understand," he said, his voice laden with contained emotion. "I just want to help her." "Then help us understand," Carol insisted. "Why this specific child? How did you meet her? Why are you withholding information about her?" Before Franklin could answer, Dr. Fields approached the group with a grave expression. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have an urgent medical situation. Willow is waking up, but she's in total panic. She only calms down when she hears Mr. Hawthorne's voice." Everyone followed the doctor to the room where Willow was admitted. The little girl was agitated in the hospital bed, her large eyes full of terror as she tried to tear off the medical equipment. Nurses were trying to calm her down, but she only cried louder. When Franklin appeared at the door, Willow stopped struggling, her eyes fixed on him with a relief so profound that it broke the hearts of everyone present. "Sir," she murmured in a hoarse voice, extending her thin little arms towards him. Franklin looked at Carol, silently asking for permission. The social worker nodded reluctantly, and he approached the bed. When Willow took his hand, she finally calmed down, her breathing returning to normal. "You're not going away?" she asked in the voice of a child who knew abandonment well. "I'm not going away," Franklin promised, feeling tears burn his eyes. It was the first time Willow had spoken directly to him, and her words revealed a deep fear of being left alone again. Carol watched the interaction with growing confusion. The child's genuine reaction didn't fit the profile of a victim. Willow clearly trusted Franklin, sought him out as a source of security, but there was still something unexplained about the whole situation. It was at that moment that Beatrice burst into the hospital, breathless from running. She had driven straight from the nursing home, desperate to tell her findings. When she saw the scene in Willow's room, she stopped abruptly. "Franklin Hawthorne," she said, her voice laden with a mixture of understanding and accusation. "Now I understand everything." All eyes turned to her. Franklin paled, recognizing the woman who had humiliated Willow weeks ago. "You lost a daughter 40 years ago," Beatrice continued, ignoring the confused looks of those present, "and now you're trying to make up for it with this girl." The silence in the room was deafening. Franklin felt the world collapsing around him for the second time in his life. His worst truths were being exposed before strangers, and even worse, before Willow. "Is it true?" Carol asked, her professional voice masking the shock. Franklin looked at Willow, who was watching him with innocent confusion, not understanding the adult's words, but sensing the tension in the air. How to explain decades of regret and guilt? How to admit that he saw in that child not only a second chance to do the right thing, but also a punishment for all the mistakes he had made? "Yes," he murmured finally. "I lost my daughter when I was young, but that doesn't change the fact that Willow needs help." "And your fortune?" Beatrice continued, relentless, "built on the suffering of families like the one that probably spawned this child. How many other Willows did you create by buying land from desperate families?" Franklin closed his eyes, the truth cutting deep. He had spent decades trying to forget the families he had destroyed in his search for wealth and stability. Now, they all seemed to converge in the form of the small girl holding his hand. Dr. Fields decided to intervene. "Excuse me, but I have important news about Willow's tests. The results of the genetic tests have arrived, and they reveal something that changes everything." She paused, looking at each person in the room. "Willow isn't an orphan. We found a genetic match in the national database. Her mother is alive." The world stopped for everyone in the room. Willow had a living mother, someone who could be looking for her, suffering her absence, or worse, someone who had deliberately abandoned her. "Where is she?" Carol asked, already pulling out her notepad. "In a psychiatric hospital in the state capital," Dr. Fields replied. "Admitted 2 years ago with severe amnesia after a traumatic accident. According to the records, she doesn't remember having a daughter." The revelation about Willow's mother created a tense silence in the hospital room. Lucy Ferrell, 28, had been hospitalized at the State Psychiatric Institute for 2 years, a victim of a car accident that had caused severe brain trauma and retrograde amnesia. According to her record, she didn't remember the last 5 years of her life, including the existence of her daughter. Dr. Fields explained that Lucy had been found unconscious on a rural road without documents. When she woke up from the coma, she couldn't remember her name, address, or family. Only recently had doctors been able to identify her through DNA tests compared with old records from hospitals where she had given birth. "She doesn't know she has a daughter?" Carol asked, processing the complexity of the situation. "Not only does she not know, but she violently rejects any mention of children," the doctor explained. "Psychiatrists believe that her mind has blocked traumatic memories related to motherhood. Any attempt to force these memories causes severe panic attacks." Franklin felt the weight of the cruel irony of fate. He had lost a daughter he could never know, and now he was protecting a child whose mother was alive but unable to remember her. He looked at Willow, who was sleeping peacefully holding his hand, unaware of the emotional storm around her. In the following days, while Willow recovered from pneumonia, a complex dynamic developed between the adults. Carol had suspended her suspicions about Franklin after witnessing his genuine dedication to the child, but now faced the professional dilemma of a family reunification with a mother who didn't remember her daughter. Beatrice, consumed by guilt for mistreating Willow, began to spend entire afternoons at the hospital. She brought children's books and small toys, trying to win the girl's forgiveness. Willow, with the intuitive wisdom of children who had suffered a lot, accepted the gifts but kept a cautious distance. "Why were you mean to me?" Willow asked one day, her voice small but direct. Beatrice felt tears burn her eyes. "Because I was angry and in pain. But that doesn't justify what I did to you. I'm so sorry, little one." "My mom said that hurt people, sometimes hurt other people," Willow replied, demonstrating a disturbing maturity for her 4 years. It was the first time Willow had mentioned memories of her mother. Everyone in the room turned to her, hoping she would continue, but the girl closed up again, as if she realized she had revealed something too precious to share. Franklin faced his own crisis. His companies were experiencing difficulties due to changes in municipal legislation on urban development. Several of his real estate projects were halted, and he needed to liquidate properties quickly to honor his financial commitments to Willow's treatment. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was selling the lands he had bought for negligible amounts decades ago, often to the very families from whom he had originally acquired them. Some of these families, now more prosperous, were buying back their old properties at fair prices, unaware of the connection to his past. "It's like life is forcing me to return what I stole," Franklin confessed to Robert, his lawyer, during a meeting about the liquidation of assets. "You didn't steal anything, Franklin. You did legal business in difficult times," Robert replied. But both knew that legality didn't absolve the conscience. Carol began to investigate treatment possibilities for Lucy that could help in the recovery of her memories. She contacted specialists in traumatic amnesia and discovered experimental therapies that showed promising results, but which cost a fortune and had no guarantee of success. It was Beatrice who suggested the solution that would change everything. "What if we brought the mother to meet Willow without telling her that she's her daughter?" she proposed during a meeting between everyone involved in the case. "Sometimes the emotional connection can awaken memories that formal therapy can't reach." The idea was risky. If Lucy found out the truth before she was ready, she could suffer a severe psychotic break. But the doctors agreed that the gradual approach could be effective, especially considering that Willow also needed to be prepared for the possibility of rejection. Franklin offered to pay for all of Lucy's experimental treatment, even knowing that it would mean selling his last valuable property, the mansion where he lived. Carol questioned his motives, but he was honest for the first time. "This child gave me something I thought I had lost forever," he said, watching Willow draw birds on hospital paper. "Hope. If there's a chance she can have her mother back, I need to try." The following weeks were of careful preparation. Lucy was transferred to St. Vincent's Hospital under the guise of participating in a social rehabilitation program. The doctors presented Willow as a child in treatment who could benefit from the company of recovering adults. The first meeting between mother and daughter was emotionally devastating for all observers. Lucy, a thin woman with lost eyes and short-cropped dark hair, entered the playroom where Willow was playing alone. For a moment, they both looked at each other in silence. Something unexplainable happened. Lucy began to cry without understanding why, and Willow approached her with the naturalness of someone who recognizes something familiar. "Are you sad?" the girl asked, offering one of her drawings. "I don't know why I'm crying," Lucy whispered, accepting the paper with trembling hands. It was a drawing of two figures holding hands, one big and one small, under a sky full of birds. During the following weeks, Lucy and Willow developed an inexplicable connection. Lucy offered to help with Willow's meals and read stories to her before bed, not knowing why she felt a compulsive need to protect that specific child. Willow, in turn, flourished in Lucy's presence in a way that surprised everyone. She laughed more, talked more, and began to demonstrate typical behaviors of children her age, something that had been suffocated by the months of survival on the streets. The moment of truth arrived on a September afternoon when Willow had a high fever due to post-surgical complications. Lucy was by her side, humming a song to calm her down, when something clicked in her fragmented mind. "Little birdie flew, flew, flew," Lucy sang, the melody flowing naturally from her lips. Willow opened her eyes and completed the song. "But in my heart, it landed." At that moment, memories began to return like an avalanche. Lucy remembered the childbirth, Willow's first words, the sleepless nights, the moments of pure happiness, and the terrible pain that made her leave home on that fateful night of the accident. "My daughter," she whispered, touching Willow's face with trembling hands. "My little one." "Mommy," Willow replied, tears running down her cheeks. "You're back." The reunion was observed by Franklin, Beatrice, Carol, and Dr. Fields, all moved to tears. But there were still practical issues to resolve. Lucy would need months of psychological counseling to fully process her recovered memories, and Willow would need therapy to deal with the trauma of the months of abandonment. Franklin, now living in a simple apartment after selling all his properties, found his new purpose. He used his business experience to create a support center for families in crisis, funded by the last resources he possessed. Beatrice transformed her fabric store into a support center for needy children, offering clothes and school supplies free of charge. Carol developed a pioneering family reunification program for complex cases like Lucy and Willow's, which became a model for other cities. She had realized that her biases almost prevented a happy ending, and this deeply changed her professional approach. 6 months later, Lucy and Willow lived in a small but cozy house on the outskirts of Harmony Creek. Lucy worked part-time as a library assistant while continuing her treatment, and Willow attended a local school where she quickly excelled in intelligence and creativity. Franklin visited regularly, no longer as the mysterious millionaire, but as the family friend who had risked everything to reunite mother and daughter. Willow called him Uncle Franklin, and always ran to hug him when he arrived, still drawing birds that now flew freely on her papers. On a golden autumn afternoon, while watching Willow play in the backyard with other children from the neighborhood, Franklin finally found peace. He had lost his fortune, but gained something infinitely more valuable: the certainty that he had done the right thing. For the first time in 40 years, he managed to forgive the young man he had been and embrace the man he had become. Beatrice, watching the scene from the window of her new neighboring house, smiled as she saw how a small girl had transformed so many lives. Sometimes, she thought, suffering serves only to prepare us to recognize happiness when it finally arrives.